Hello and welcome to Unacademy. As part of Hindu analysis, today we'll be discussing 5 to 6 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper. But before we begin, a very important announcement that the 24,999 offer is going to end tomorrow, and therefore if you have ever thought of a subscription with us, this is the right time. With this, let's look at the 5 topics which we are going to cover. Sunday newspaper, FAQ is actually the section which is relevant to us, and we've taken 2 topics out of it. First, we'll try to understand the controversy with regards to the Tirupati laddus, and there's a lot of interesting parameters which have been talked about, previously not covered in any newspaper or article. Then a major development coming from the West Asian sector with the Secretary General of Hezbollah dead. We'll discuss what is the impact of that on the larger landscape of West Asia. Then the antibiotic based microbial resistance concept and Kerala, how it has created a policy which is not scalable. We'll discuss this. Then we will talk about an endangered species, and in the end a scheme related to rooftop solar power plants, or what we call as RTS. Now, before we begin, I hope that you know that there will be 5 questions which will be available on the Telegram channel. You should like, share and subscribe to the channel also. More than that, on Saturdays at 8 p.m. on our Unacademy app, we also have a current affairs test which is uploaded, which is called SIP, Success in Prelims, and you can find the link in the description box for the SIP. Already 3 tests have happened in the past 3 weeks. This is basically a roundup of the whole week, and you can actually attempt questions, get a rank there also. So you should be a part of the SIP. The link is in the description box, and I hope that you will use it. On every Saturday we have a test coming through, and the link will be active throughout the week. So Saturday to Saturday you can give it. If it is not possible on Saturday, you can give it today, tomorrow, but an important program tailored for you and current affairs. With this, let's begin our analysis with regards to the Tirupati laddus. Now, I'll try to give you a little bit of background. Then we'll go into the parameters which have been talked about and what this controversy really entails and what is the larger concept which is behind this whole concept. Now, when we talk about Tirupati laddus, we have to talk about the temple itself, which is the Lord Venkateshwara temple, Tirumala Tirupati Devsthanam run Tirumala Venkateshwara temple. As per tradition, as mentioned in the Garud Puran and the Brahma Puran, Lord Venkateshwara is seen as an incarnation of Lord Vishnu, and in the 7 hills complex of the Tirumala hills on the Venkata hill, we have a very ancient temple which is related to the Pallavas. So the first reference, though we find it in the Purans, it is the Pallavas who have been credited to have added the Gopuram and the other complexes which are there. Thereafter, it was the Cholas who gave grandeur to this temple complex, and it is Vijayanagara in which the whole what we call the Venkata hill was developed as a very important site of holy, what we call as Venkateshwara, or what we call as the Tirumala Tirupati Devsthanam based city. So this whole hill has a city on it which is run not by the municipal corporation but by the TTD itself. So this trust is one of the most prosperous and richest trusts in India. TTD runs a whole city, has a lot of different what we call as subsidiaries, and the most important part is it gets a lot of dakshina, or what we call as donation, in the form of whatever is coming to the temple itself. A very interesting donation to this temple is also here, which is seen as a way of appeasing the god itself, but it's a very prosperous trust. TTD is not a trust which struggles in its revenue. It has a lot of profit which it generates and is pushed back into the city also. A lot of amenities is also given. So it is the Pallavas who created the real what we call as temple complexes. Cholas took it forward, and it is the Vijayanagara who made this whole temple complex what it is today. But it is Ramanujachari who basically revived this temple back after the Vijayanagara lull period in 12th century. In 12th century, it was Ramanujachari who basically said that this is a very important place of worship, and it was added to the larger maps of Shakti Peeths and the pantheism which was happening during the 12th century and the Bhakti movement that was. So that was a very important temple, and TTD itself is a very important body in that regard. Now, as part of the prasadam of Tirupati temple, you get what is called as the Tirupati laddu. This tradition of offering laddu and getting prasad as laddu is a 300 year, you can believe it is 500 years, but institutionalized in 1715, and it is produced in a holy kitchen, the temple kitchen as it is called, the pottu, and it is known for its divine fragrance and its unique taste, which got it the GI tag in 2014. Some places it will say 2013. 2013-14, basically process initiated in 2013, got it in 2014. The laddu got a GI tag in 2014, and more than that, only 6 times in these 300 years, the what we call as ingredients or the recipe has been changed for this laddu. That way, this is not just a random laddu or a prasadam, it has a lot of value. GI means that it gives it a specific, what we call as geographical based characteristic, or you can say characteristic based on geography. So that specific unique characteristic is based, you cannot sell a laddu in Maharashtra or in Karnataka saying that it is a Tirupati laddu because it has a GI tag. Only laddus produced in the pottu of this temple can be called the Tirupati laddu, therefore the GI. So a specific characteristic having been seen as a origin of its geographical space, meaning that because of the geography, because of its place of origin, it has a unique characteristics. That is basically what GI gives recognition to. Now, in that context, this laddu is considered to be quite important. It is not just one prasadam, it is considered holy, it is about faith and it is about religion. Now, over and above that, this laddu was recently also sent. 2000 of such laddus were sent to the Ram temple opening and the consolation. That ways, it was considered to be also quite important that there is a certain understanding which is developing between these temples, and therefore, this laddu has a lot of importance. That is what I am trying to establish. This is the backstory, which is the temple itself known for its what we call as grandeur and its wealth, and on the other hand, the GI tag which has been given to the Tirupati laddu. Now, the recent controversy is that the government has argued, the present government of Telangana and rather the Andhra Pradesh government has argued that the ghee which was used, so the Andhra government of Chandrababu Naidu has argued that the ghee which was used, the supplier being AR Dairy Food Private Limited, has actually given them adulterated ghee, and that adulterated ghee had soya bean, sunflower oil, rapeseed oil, but the more problematic aspect is lard and beef tallow, which is animal fat. Now, the concept is that there has been corners which have been cut. Pure cow ghee which would come around 600 to 700 and in some cases 1000 to 1200 rupees per kg, that was supplied by AR Dairy to the Tirupati pottu at 320 rupees per kg. This should have been the first red flag, which is half the rate of the prevailing market price the ghee was supplied to the pottu of the temple itself. But what is more problematic is this was done through a very standard process which is there in bureaucracy, but should not have been followed by the TTD, which is called reverse auction, or this is a technical term, we call it tender, which is you give a contract or a tender. Now, this is a very standard processes for you even midday meals to any government, what we call as procurement. There is a tender or reverse auction concept. Auction, the price increases once the bid comes through, open auction as it is called. Reverse auctioning is that you give the lowest price possible for what you are supplying. Now, the idea is that AR Dairy Foods was able to win this tender, was able to win this reverse auction, was because of the fact that it was adulterating the ghee and bringing down the prices. Now, this is the first aspect which has been there in the news quite a lot, the more emotional aspect, which is animal fat being found in a prasad of a temple in itself is a very, very problematic, what we call as a news, because you don't associate these things with the temple. This is the first aspect. The second aspect is that reverse auction is now in the news because of the fact that this tendering process was followed. Now, this is where TTD as a trust becomes problematic. It has a lot of money. It can afford 600 rupees also, 1000 rupees also when they have to produce close to 1 million such laddus a month. At a given point of time, 10 lakh such laddus are supplied across India in the form of prasad. So it is not that it is one random day that they got such a big order, it is always like this. And therefore, they try to cut corners through the concept of reverse auction, and reverse auction would only be recipe for disaster, because when it comes to tendering, the supplier will always cut corners and try to supply more at a lower what we call cost price. And therefore, AR Dairy Foods, which has now got a show cause notice, is the problematic supplier. Now Nandini Ghee has been replaced by it, or the Nandini Corporation from Karnataka has been replaced by it. But the point is, why was there a need to do this? When this is one of the most important ingredients, why was there a need to do reverse auction when there is no issue of money to the trust itself? Now, the second aspect which comes out of the article and becomes important for you and me is that how were they able to establish that it was actually adulterated? And this is where a German technique, or a technique which was quite common in Europe, still used, which is quite problematic, because the ghee which is produced by Indian cows and the ghee which is produced for example, a European cow would be quite different in its composition. But the idea is, it's called the S value index, which is standard value index, developed in 1991 by a German scientist, Precht. Now, this value concept is based on the fact that ghee is basically triglyceride. It is a triglyceride which is glycerol, what we call as chains together, and once it goes into a certain spectrography, it produces a certain spectrum of what we call as glycerol molecules. And in that, there are certain categories, meaning if a certain ghee or oil has certain adulterations, it will show under S1, S2, S3, S4 and S5 category, which is S1 is if that has been adulterated by soybean or sunflower oil, S2 is coconut or palm oil, S3 is palm oil plus beef tallow, S4 is lard, S5 is the whole fat what has been pushed into the spectrography is basically fully adulterated. Now, there is a certain indicator, meaning it has to be a certain percentage point to 100 to give a specific range. Pure cow ghee will have S1, S2, S3, S4 and S5 in a very low quantity in a specified range which has been used by the ISO also. And when it comes to the ghee which was used by the TTD under AR Dairy, it is showing all S1, S2, S3, S4 and S5 all in the wrong ranges. And therefore, this protocol which is used to check foreign fat presence has now created a lot of red flags. So, for you what becomes important for the examination is the name of this scientist and the concept of S value. S value basically gives you a certain percentage of adulteration, and therefore, if they say S value or standard value which was recently in the news, it is related to what we call as adulteration of fat, and foreign fat has been found. Now, the article, though it talks about all of these aspects, which is S1, S2, S3, and it gives us a value that close to 22.43 beef tallow was found, and palm oil and S2 and S3 was found in the Tirupati laddu. It questions its own finding in the last section, and this is the problem of this article itself. It says that S1, S2, S3, S4 which is used is okay. However, it is a European standard. Now, therefore, though they are saying that adulteration would have happened, was it animal fat and beef tallow and lard is a questionable aspect. Now, the question here is that we do not have a India based standardized what we call as spectrum. We are using a European what we call as standard concept or a European measurement technique itself. Now, the question which automatically arises is UPSC will never ask you that tell us how did they get to it. The question is why did this happen? And this brings us to a topic which we discussed in UCAN also recently, which is, was there a need to follow this procedure of reverse auction. I am repeating myself. There are three aspects which are listed or linked to this concept. The first concept is very simple, which is the temple history itself. I hope that is sorted. The second one is the concept of S value, which is S values used to find this. Now Nandini is the what we call as supplier to the TTD. Previously it was AR Dairy for at least 4 to 5 years, and that is where the problematic aspect has come through. It is a matter of faith, it is a matter of religion, therefore it should have been a little bit more screened. Now the third aspect is this, that was there a need to follow reverse auction when the TTD has no real problem with regards to money? And this is where why was not the ghee screened? Why was not it verified? And therefore, the TTD has the ability to get this ghee in a way tested also. It's a very expensive procedure, but the TTD could have been. Now, this is where TTD, because it has a bureaucratic model, the question comes is that is over bureaucratization of something problematic, which is that reverse auction in GEM makes sense, government marketplace makes sense. It makes sense when you are trying to procure cement, but when you are trying to procure ghee for a very holy aspect for a prasad, then why are we following these procedures? And this is where the question comes in, that do we need to not privatize these trusts, but we need to create a specific procedure which is unique to these trusts itself, rather than creating a model in which they are following bureaucratic procedures which the IS officers, the DMs, and you automatically become a part of the committee, and the chairman of the TTD is mostly an IS officer. The way they have created a mechanism, why was there a need for reverse auction and tendering? And with so much supply being assured, why was not Nandini or Amul, more trusted brands, actually given this on a better understanding? Yes, they will not give you at 320 rupees per kg. But the fact that if Nandini is filling up that tender and Amul is filling up that tender with 700 rupees per kg, then why are you giving it to a 320 rupees per kg? That should have automatically created a lot of questions. Because if you are getting something very expensive at a very cheap rate, it is automatically a recipe for disaster, and the fact that adulteration would have happened. Now, this is what UPSC can ask you in the examination, and that is why this topic becomes important. That the Tirupati laddu issue is a cautionary tale of bureaucratic mechanisms in matters of faith and trust. This is both a governance question, this is both a question of how you tend to hold sensitive issues as an IS officer. And this is where the idea is, you cannot say that you make TTD a fully autonomous body or make it fully immune to bureaucratic control. That is equally important with the amount of money which is associated with this trust. But the idea is, at least temple trusts can have a different procedural concept rather than following the standard reverse auction, standard tendering process which are done in every aspect of Government of India. And this is where the Tirupati laddu issue becomes a very important aspect for our examination, because it gives us a new aspect of governance. So, this topic has three aspects. These three should be totally sorted: temple, S value, and the concept of reverse auction. This is still a developing story. As I said, the article itself contradicts itself in the last section. The first three sections are about what is the fact concept, what is the S value, but in the end it starts to waver around by saying that maybe this is not the right indicator, we need further examination. So, let us see where this goes in the larger context. After this, we move to the second topic, which is a very, very important development with regards to Hezbollah, Israel, Palestine and Lebanon, which is the death of Hassan Nasrallah, which is, he is the General Secretary of the Hezbollah. He made Hezbollah what it is today, and therefore his death is a very big blow to Hezbollah, but also the geopolitics of this sector. Now, again, we will discuss it in three basic heads. First is, what is the history of Hezbollah? Second, the aspect related to why is all of this happening, meaning we will not presume that you already know. So, the idea that what is the pager and walkie-talkie explosions or attack which has recently happened, what is the ballistic missile issue, and the third, which is the more important one, which is, where is Israel in this conflict, meaning is it seeing light in the end of the tunnel? Has it won this war? And what is the next step which Israel can take? Because quite critical for the politics of this sector. Now, first things first, Israel, produced by the Zionist movement and the idea of Jews being persecuted across the world, and the idea that Jews and Christianity has an anti-Semitic streak to it with regards to how they have in a way institutionalized hatred toward the Jews within Christianity, and Hitler gave the ultimate solution to that, which is the extermination of the Jews, which in turn produced the Israeli movement. Israel was in a way created on the Palestinian lands, and now Palestine has been pushed into two small sectors, which is the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and the Jews versus Muslim, which is the conflict between Israel and Palestine, has been now been in the news for now close to a year, but is a standard static topic which you will see in UPSC. Now, Israel also has a little bit of its, you can say, hands full because of its relationship with its neighbors, be it Syria, be it Lebanon, be it Jordan, be it Egypt. The idea is Lebanon initially became a very big problem in the 1980s. Egypt also, it has fought a war. With Jordan also it has a lot of conflict, and with Syria and Lebanon together, it has all borders are problematic for Israel. However, the 7th October attack on Israel by the Hamas in a way shook or in a way destroyed the artificial peace which was coming through vis-a-vis certain artificial, you can say, treaties coming through between Iran, Iraq and Saudi Arabia, along with the what we call as West Asian artificial, you can say, winters in that regard. But the idea was, with the Hamas attack, Israel has become extremely aggressive and wants total victory over Hamas and the solution. And that brings in Hezbollah into the context, because Hezbollah considered to be Iran-sponsored, what we call as terrorist organizations. We know that the 1,200 people who died in Israel in that attack has created a lot of what you can call as political will within Israel itself to have a solution for Palestine. And Gaza Strip has now been in a way bombarded, close to 1,20,000 people dead, and it has now become an open refugee camp. West Bank, same story. But the idea is, where does Lebanon come into this context? We know that Israel-Palestine is an issue. Where does Lebanon come into this larger picture? And that is related to this organization, which is Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a Shia resistance organization which was created in 1982 by the Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, which funded the creation of the Hezbollah. And it's the same year Israel invaded Lebanon in the pursuit of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Hezbollah was created. And this is where the history of the Hezbollah becomes important. See, Israel had one major issue in the 1980s, which is the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization. Hamas is also a contemporary organization, but was not the problem for Israel at that point of time. And the PLO used to operate from Lebanon. And in 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon in order to destroy the PLO. In the process of destroying the PLO, which then moved out of Lebanon into Tunisia, what happened was that a Shia militant organization and resistance started in Lebanon against Israeli occupation. And Israel did occupy the southern parts of Lebanon for a very long time, and Hezbollah played a very important role in pushing it back in 2006 and the period in the 2000s in that sense. And the Shia community historically has felt within Lebanon quite threatened, because Lebanon has a what we call as power sharing model, in which the Maronite Christians get the presidency and the premiership, which is the prime minister's position, goes to the Sunnis, and it is mostly a Sunni, what we call as dominated parliament also there. And therefore, the Shias always felt marginalized. So, they got a lot of, you can say, voice and encouragement in the form of the Hezbollah, and Hezbollah was able to produce a political entity, a militant entity, and a social network through which it does good for the people on the lower stratas, where they get their basic humanitarian image. However, it has a militant unit. It is considered a terrorist organization by the US and the Israelis, and it has, as of right now today, short range, long range missiles along with ballistic missiles. And within Lebanon, Hezbollah does hold a lot of power. Hezbollah is much more powerful, Iran funded body than Hamas. Hamas would be half or even 1/4 of what Hezbollah is. And this is basically where Israel produced Hezbollah in the process of removing PLO from Lebanon. And Hezbollah has been a problem for Israel also, because recently there was a ballistic missile which was fired from the Lebanon side, and Hezbollah has argued till Palestine issue is there, till Israel bombs West Bank or Gaza Strip, Hezbollah is going to fire what we call as rockets, be it short range or long range, inside or into Israel. And a recent major escalation was when one of these ballistic missiles was intercepted over Tel Aviv. Therefore, it is a very strong organization. What I call the Fateh ballistic missiles with close to 250 kilometers range. We have the Sayyad surface to surface and the C-802 anti-ship missiles, which is all supplied by Iran in that regard. That way, it is a very strong organization, unlike the Hamas. Now, this is the story of how Hezbollah was created. And thereafter comes the recent context in which Hezbollah has been, in a way, been a problematic neighbor to or you can say problematic entity to the Israelis. Israel retaliated via the pager attacks, in which these are mostly Israel, is not Israeli produced, but they in a way targeted the batteries inside these pagers which were set to explode, and therefore their retaliation has now reached its peak point with the death of Hassan Nasrallah, because he is the Secretary General of Hezbollah and he has created Hezbollah as it is today. He is considered the architect of Hezbollah today. Now, the question is, now with Secretary General dead and the pager attacks, Hezbollah is on the back foot. That everybody understands. And we also understand that Hezbollah retaliated via hundreds of rockets into Israel. We also know that the walkie-talkie pager explosions was orchestrated by the Israelis. We also understand that Hezbollah is trying to find a way to react to this. Nasrallah's death is in a way the heaviest blow to them. Consciously or by its limitations, Hezbollah has in a way retaliated to the walkie-talkie blasts, and whatever was happening before yesterday, which is Nasrallah's death, was short-range rockets in response to the airstrikes which Israel was doing inside Lebanon. Now, this puts this whole sector in a precarious position. Let's try to understand the precarious nature of that. See, Hezbollah is now on the back foot. However, it argues that it will keep on bombing Israel till the Palestinian issue remains. Thereafter, Israel is now in a corner. See, Israel's nuclear power has not been a deterrent for Hezbollah to attack it. And Hezbollah's attack on Israel has not been a deterrent for, or in a way, has not in a way discouraged Israel from not doing the pager attacks or the airstrikes. So, though Hezbollah is a much stronger body than Hamas, neither are backing down. Now, Israel is in a precarious position because it can't say that it has won this sector, because Hezbollah still exists, somehow Hamas also exists. So, it can't declare victory, that it is total victory in this war. Second is that it can't go for ceasefire, because as soon as Netanyahu goes for ceasefire, his government will fall, because the far right in Israel have already said that we will not stand by a peace agreement with Hamas or Hezbollah. You cannot go for a ceasefire. His government will fall. And what Israel has been contemplating is that does it just go with airstrikes or these covert operations as it is doing, or it goes for war. Now obviously Hezbollah is not in the position to go to war with Israel. Israel obviously any day has much greater power to Hezbollah. But is Israel trying to push Hezbollah into war, therefore trying for an invasion of Lebanon? So therefore Israel, as of right now, Hamas still exists, Hezbollah still exists with the biggest blow to it. Lebanon, either a ground attack is being contemplated, airstrikes are already happening. Now if it is a ground attack, it becomes an outright war itself. And therefore, this sector further destabilizes and becomes a more problematic zone in the world. And this is where Israel is caught up in this quagmire, in this dilemma, that what does it do? And these are the two aspects which the article also talks about, which is Israel has already created an open refugee camp in Gaza, but cannot say it has won. More than that, there is a chance that with a ceasefire deal, his government is going to collapse, and therefore the power of the you can say inequality of power, or the way Israel holds a lot of power vis-a-vis Hezbollah, has not deterred Hezbollah from doing what it is doing. And therefore, the next step is going to be quite important. Does Israel follow this proxy war concept, which is covert operations, or does it go for full-blown attack and invasion of Lebanon? This is where this article and this topic is something which is escalating further, and something which we have to basically develop further as it goes on. It has already been a year to this issue, and therefore we need to see how does Israel respond. As it seems, Israel's imminent ground invasion or attack on Lebanon is the most likeliest of options which is available to Israel itself, and this will only complicate this sector more and will bring us to the 1980s, 70s, 90s, what we call as dynamics, where Israel was in a way holding or was expanding on the cost of Lebanon and Egypt. And therefore, let us see where this concept goes. But UPSC can give you a question like this. Israel is practically stuck in Gaza's quagmire without something that can be shown to the public as victory. Comment. This is an interesting question because this tells you the precarious nature of geopolitics in this sector. With this, let's move to the third topic, which is equally important and interesting, GS paper 3. See, we all know or we also use, in India there is a certain, you can say, insensitivity towards use of antibiotics, which is, even with very simple, straightforward, common cold, we tend to take erythromycin, augmentin, very high dosed antibiotics in that regard. And what misuse or abuse of antibiotic does is, it makes the bacterial or what we call as the infections antibiotic resistant, which is the genetic mutations in the organisms, in the bacteria, now tend to become resistant to the antibiotics which we are using. And that is why you would have seen that you may have erythromycin, for example, in your childhood it would work really, really well, but because of a long use and drug abuse of antibiotics, now today even if you have an antibiotic, for example, erythromycin, the lowest grade broad spectrum antibiotic which is there, if you take it, it will not do anything to you, because your body, more than that, the bacteria have become resistant to that, what we call as antibiotic in that regard. That is a very big issue. And because antibiotics are given to poultry, to the dairy sector, to even nowadays vegetables are in a way the pesticides, or you can say the insecticides, or even the manure which is being provided, there is a lot of antimicrobial, what we call as substances which are added to it. And therefore, you and me consume in the milk, in vegetable, in poultry, in egg, in fish, if you are a non-vegetarian, a lot of antibiotics. Now, Kerala tried to respond to this issue of AMR, as it is called, antimicrobial resistance, and that is where Kerala developed a certain strategy. Now, there was a Government of India operation or Government of India scheme which is called Operation Amrit, which is antimicrobial resistance intervention for total health. Operation Amrit was about stopping over the counter, which is without a prescription, over the counter sale of antibiotics by the end of 2024. Now, vis-a-vis this aspect, it is only Kerala which has applied this model and this operation properly, and there are reports which are coming in that there has been a very strong shortfall or decrease in the sale of antibiotics in the Kerala sector and in the cities of Kerala. Now, this means that it has succeeded in a way applying a rule, and that rule is called the 2011 H1 rule. Now, H1 rule basically is the concept. H1 rule is the concept that in 2011, the Government of India brought in the H1 rule under which, for example, in America also you have this type of rules, which is you cannot buy without prescription antibiotics over the counter. Meaning, I can't go to a chemist and say, give me erythromycin. He says nothing. He gives me the erythromycin. Now, in 2013, the Government of India changed this rule because it believed that it was doing more harm, and there are multiple lines. It's called first line, second line and third line. And the first line is your chemist, second line is when you get it within the hospital itself, third line is when in very specialized cases you need very high dose antibiotics, and 2011 had banned all three lines, meaning you can't get without prescription antibiotics in the first, second or third line of medical practice. But in 2013, they released or eased the concept that in first line at least you can get over the counter what we call as antibiotics without prescription, because it was doing more, you can say more harm, it was counterproductive, because in remote areas where doctor ratio is very less, people were not able to buy basic medication also. So, in 2011 they brought in a rule, nobody can buy an antibiotic without prescription. Then in 2013 the Government of India changed this rule. However, Kerala didn't change the rule. Kerala did not change the rule. It kept the 2011 H1 rule only, which is with good doctor-patient ratio, with availability of doctors and good healthcare sector. They said we will not sell anybody antibiotics until unless that person has a prescription. So, more or less in peninsular India and in most, except for Kerala, every other state follows the 2013 H1 rule, which is in the first line at chemist you will get it without prescription. But Kerala is the only sector or the only state in India which still follows 2011 H1 rule. So, 2013 H1 rule says you can get in the chemist antibiotic, basic antibiotic broad spectrum without prescription. Second and third line, which is heavier antibiotics, you will not get. On the other hand, Kerala said no, we will go with the original understanding because we have a good what we call as healthcare sector, we will follow this concept. Now, this is a good model. This is a good model, and now we have a certain, you can say, result of it also, which is the 1,000 crore deficit which has been there in the sale of antibiotics. But has this reduced the AMR in Kerala? And herein lies the paradox, which is that if you look at the profile of how the food which Kerala gets, Kerala imports at least 60% of all its chicken, eggs and vegetables from neighboring states, and similarly 40% of all its vegetables comes from its neighbors, and 42% of its egg requirements are also only met within the state, everything else comes out of the state. Now, imagine that Kerala follows the 2011 H1 rule. However, every state around it follows the 2013 H1 rule. This means that through chicken, through egg, through vegetables, through food, the state is getting non-21H1 compliant chicken, eggs and vegetables. Meaning Kerala is following a rule which is not possible even in states where they have a good doctor to patient ratio, but they are not consuming it themselves, but they are getting it through the imported, or you can say from the supplied eggs, chicken and vegetables. And therefore, the net result is 0. Because though Kerala is not following a rule which is followed by everyone else, and it is safeguarding its population from AMR, the non-compliant states, AMR is still an issue in Kerala because the food supply has antibiotics in it. And this is where the article argues that the Kerala policy is non-scalable and the approach is not correct. The approach is not correct because this imported food carries a lot of antibiotic resistance and residues, and therefore the cycle of AMR spread has not stopped. And this is why the government of Kerala should reconsider its understanding, because if they are not getting it from the point sort which is in situ, if they are not getting, they are getting ex situ, which is they are getting it out of state itself. If Kerala goes to the 2013 model, maybe it can create a model which can be emulated and replicated in other states. As of right now, this hard-handed approach that we will not allow first, second and third line is undercut by the fact that everyone else around it is not following this strategy, and therefore even if they want it or they don't want it, AMR still remains an issue in Kerala. And this is where this type of a question becomes important, which is Kerala's antibiotics policy and approach is not a practicable and scalable example for other Indian states. Analyze. This is based on the fact that with no concept of national regulation and Kerala following a certain model which is not scalable in states where the doctor patient ratio is very low, and therefore though it is trying to stop AMR within its own borders, it is getting the same thing from the other states. So why follow a model which cannot be in a way made to a scale for India itself? And this is where the article's argument is Kerala has set an example here, but it needs to change its model so that it can create an example which can be followed by everyone else. This is where this article becomes important, and I hope you are sorted with regards to this aspect also. A very good question. You can actually write an answer for this and see how this article can give you fodder to write a good answer for this question. With this, let's move to the khur, or the Indian wild ass as it is called, a near threatened IUCN status, what we call as species, which is there in the run of Kutch, in what is called as little run of Kutch. And the article actually talks about what are the vulnerabilities. Now, this is important for your environment, which is what are the vulnerabilities which have emerged recently for the wild ass. It has argued that the wild ass sanctuary which is there in the little run of Kutch, which houses close to 6,000 of such khurs, they are called khur, which is the wild ass, Indian wild ass as it is called. This this species has been quite resilient. It has survived and outlasted the cheetah and the lions of this sector, and it has a very good digestive tract and a process through which it can survive in this arid and desolate, you can say, landscape in that regard. And that is why it is near threatened, not critically endangered or endangered. But what the article points out is that, and that is important for the examination, is that what are the new issues which are emerging which could lead to the khur becoming a extinct species or near threatened in that regard, from near threatened to critically endangered. And this is where 3 to 4 important points have been pointed out. First is that there is a seasonal migration of population into the run of Kutch, which in turn leads to 5,000 families coming into this space, and they bring in their cattle with them. Cattle grazing and the delicate environment of this sector, the ecosystem of this sector, does not create enough space for cattle and the khur to exist together. And more than that, with irrigation channels coming through in this area with agriculture being introduced in limited capacity. It is adding to the salinity of the soil, which is not good for the khur. But the biggest issue is human khur conflict, which is that with increasing human presence, and though nilgai and pigs are a bigger issue for crop damage, khurs are now being identified by the agricultural community in this sector as the ones who are destroying the crop. And with, you can say, decreasing or contracting habitat, there is more and more khur and human interaction. And therefore, for both the ecosystem and the khur to survive, the government of India needs to find a solution in a way that this animal has a secured habitat also, and it does not become a problem for the larger space. Because if crop damage is something which is being considered problematic and which in turn leads to the death and the killings of these animals, it is going to become a larger issue in the long run in that sense, and can move it from near threatened to endangered. And therefore, we have to find a solution, and that is one of the points which this science based article talks about. Simple, straightforward, but khur is now in the news. You should know about it. Near threatened under IUCN status. Found in India, Run of Kutch sector, some parts in Mongolia, some West Asian states, West Asian countries have this wild ass category, or what we call as Indian wild ass, generally called the wild ass species. Now, with this, let's move to the last topic, again a small one, a straightforward one, which is based on a scheme which is now turning out to be a major game changer for our solar installations. The scheme is called PM Muft Bijli Solar Yojana, PMSY as it is called, and under it the scheme will try to install at least 1 crore rooftop solar installations, RTS as they are called, and under this Gujarat has now become a major hotspot where such subsidy based solar installations are happening. And this is the relevant portion for you for the examination, that in rooftop solar plants, Gujarat leads all the states with close to 4,000 megawatts, Maharashtra 2,000 and Rajasthan 1,000, though this is only 10% or 20% of the capacity of the state to produce it. The model is quite interesting, where you get a subsidy to install a certain kilowatt based system at your house, and it is believed that in certain spaces in Gujarat, the bills have now become negative, and the RTS is supplying more to the grid, that it is more rather than the houses taking it, they are supplying more to the whole grid itself, and that is why this scheme is turning out to be a game changer. Now, for the examination, have to remember the scheme, have to remember its target, have to remember its ambition, and have to remember this data will help you in writing a good answer for GS paper 3 also. So, with this we have completed the 5 topics which we had endeavored to start to cover for this session from 10 o'clock itself. Now, please do understand 3 things. First is that the AMR static portion becomes important, because now it has been in the news quite a lot. Second, khur as a species becomes important, can come in the examination. Third is, see, Israel-Palestine as it is an issue and is a very standard thing which you will learn in international relations. But the death of the General Secretary is a very major development, and therefore, this may lead to further escalation, and this is a topic which we have to follow properly. And last but not the least is, schemes is again something which is always in the news, and with these type of articles coming through, you will take care of these type of questions and topics for the examination. I have given you 3 questions to practice for mains. There will be 5 questions waiting for you on Telegram, and I hope that you are also engaging with SIP on our platform. With this, I would like to end the session. I will see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.